day of freedom or a new prison? The night was stormy, lightning flashing outside the window as I sat at the table. The divorce papers lay before me, cold and emotionless. I picked up the pen, my hands trembling. I never thought this day would come. And yet, here I was. I signed. The ink bled into the paper like a wound opening up. For years, I tried to believe that he loved me, that maybe, just maybe, I was enough. But deep down, I always knew I was living in the shadow of someone else, his first love, the woman he never stopped thinking about. I should feel free now, right? Relieved? But then, why did my heart feel so heavy? As I pushed the papers away, I heard a noise from the hallway. His footsteps. The door creaked open, and there he was, my soon-to-be ex-husband. His eyes locked onto the papers on the table. His face twisted into something I had never seen before. Disbelief, shock, horror. "You signed it?" His voice cracked. "Yes," I whispered. And then something happened that I never expected. His entire body shook as if he had lost all control. His breathing became uneven, his hands clenched into fists. And then he collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. I stood frozen. Why was he crying? Shouldn't he be happy? Shouldn't he be running to her, the woman he always loved? I watched, my mind spinning. And then he lifted his head, his face twisted in agony. "You don't understand," he whispered. A chill ran down my spine. "Understand what?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the divorce papers and tore them apart, his breath ragged, his eyes wild. "No," he muttered. "This is not how it ends. You can't leave." I took a step back. A sinking feeling grew inside me. I had prepared myself for many reactions, but not this. And that's when I realized I had no idea who I was really married to. The silence in the room was suffocating. Outside, thunder rumbled, shaking the walls of our house. Inside, my heartbeat pounded like a war drum. His breathing was erratic, his fingers gripping the torn divorce papers as if they were his lifeline. He wasn't just upset. He was terrified. But of what? "Talk to me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head violently. "You don't understand what you've done." I swallowed. My throat felt dry. What have I done? My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay strong. He stared at me, eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't read. And then, in a voice so low it was almost lost in the storm, he said, "They won't let you leave." My stomach dropped. "Who?" His hands trembled as he reached for me, but I stepped back. A strange fear clawed at my chest. I had known this man for years, had shared my life with him, but at this moment, he felt like a stranger. "Who won't let me leave?" I pressed, my heart thudding faster. His lips parted as if to speak, but then he froze. And then, a knock at the door. I jerked, startled. The sound was sharp, precise. He turned ghostly pale. "Don't answer it," he whispered. My breath hitched. "Who is it?" His grip on my wrist tightened. "Just trust me. Do not open that door." The knock came again, harder, more insistent. I glanced at the clock. 12:03 a.m. Who would be at our door at this hour? And why was he so afraid? I pulled my wrist free and took a step toward the door. His voice, low and desperate, followed me. "Please," he begged. "If you open that door, everything changes." But I was already moving. My fingers curled around the doorknob. The air in the room felt thick, charged with something I couldn't explain. And then I turned the handle. But before I could pull the door open completely, a gust of wind rushed in from the gap, chilling me to the bone. The hallway outside was dark, too dark, as if the night itself had swallowed any light. My breath caught in my throat. Then I heard it, a whisper. It wasn't a voice. It was something more sinister, something that slithered through the air like a warning. My husband's grip tightened on my wrist, his nails digging into my skin. "Close it. Now." For the first time that night, I hesitated. "Who's there?" My voice trembled as I peered into the darkness. And then, a shape moved. Not walked. Moved. My pulse skyrocketed. The figure stood just beyond the doorframe, its form barely distinguishable from the shadows. I could make out no eyes, no mouth, only an outline of something humanoid, something unnatural. And then, it took a step forward. My husband yanked me back so hard that I stumbled, my shoulder slamming against the wall. He didn't say a word. He just reached out, grabbed the door, and slammed it shut with such force that the walls seemed to tremble. The house fell silent. Only the rain tapping against the windows remained. I looked at him, breathless. "What was that?" He didn't answer. He just backed away, his face pale, his eyes hollow. And then he whispered something that made my blood run cold. "It knows you want to leave." The presence beyond the door. The silence stretched between us like an unspoken horror. My breath came out in ragged gasps as I stared at my husband, the man I had once trusted more than anyone, the man who, just moments ago, had told me that someone, would not let me leave. The knock at the door had stopped, but I could feel it. A presence. Something unnatural lurking beyond the wooden barrier. My fingers were still trembling from where they had grazed the doorknob. My pulse hammered against my ribcage. I knew deep down that if I had opened that door even a second more, something unthinkable would have happened. But what? My husband's eyes darted between the door and me, his face ashen. "You shouldn't have touched it," he whispered. "They know now." I swallowed, my mouth dry. "Who?" I demanded. "Who knows?" A loud thump came from the other side of the door. I jumped back, nearly tripping over my own feet. My husband caught me, but his grip was unsteady, just as afraid as I was. I had never seen him like this before, not once. "Don't talk. Don't move," he instructed under his breath. "Maybe they'll go away. Maybe." I pressed my lips together, my body locked in place, listening. Outside, the storm howled like a wounded beast, but inside, an eerie silence settled, disturbed only by the sound of our own shallow breathing. Then it came again, a whisper, right at the keyhole. Low, inhuman, a rasping sound like wind through dry leaves, but distorted. Wrong. A breath on the other side of the door. A presence leaning in, waiting. Listening. I wanted to run, wanted to scream, but I knew better. Something deep in my bones told me that if I made a sound, it would know, it would come in. I turned to my husband, desperate. "What is it?" I mouthed. His lips barely moved as he responded. "They call them Watchers." The name sent a chill through my veins. Watchers? I had never heard of them before, but somehow I knew I had just encountered something far beyond my comprehension. Then, as suddenly as it came, it was gone. The whispering stopped. The air in the room shifted like a pressure valve being released. The storm outside raged on, but the unnatural presence beyond our door had disappeared. Or so it seemed. I didn't dare move, didn't dare let my guard down. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, my husband reached out and placed his hand over mine, squeezing it slightly. It's over, for now. I exhaled the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. What the hell is going on? He looked at me with something between sorrow and terror. I was never supposed to let you go, he said quietly. They made sure of that. My stomach twisted. What are you talking about? His jaw tightened. You think I just didn't want to sign those papers? That it was just me? It wasn't. The day we got married, something bound us together. Something ancient. Something I didn't understand then. And still don't now. But they do. They've been watching. Waiting. My skin prickled. That doesn't make sense. His hands curled into fists. I wish it didn't. But you saw them. You heard them. That means they know you're trying to leave. And now... His voice trailed off as a new noise filled the room. A scratching sound. Not from the door this time. From the windows. I whipped my head around, my breath hitched in my throat. The storm outside was relentless, sheets of rain crashing against the glass. But beyond the water droplets, I saw them. Figures. Tall, impossibly thin. Their limbs were elongated, unnaturally so. Their fingers stretched out like spindly branches, tapping against the window pane in a slow, deliberate rhythm. 1, 2, 3. They had no faces. Only hollow, gaping voids where eyes and mouths should have been. I stumbled backward, my hands covering my mouth. My husband moved quickly, grabbing my arm. Don't look at them. Whatever you do, don't look at them too long. But I couldn't move. I was frozen in horror. Then, in perfect unison, every single figure at the window turned its head toward me. I let out a strangled gasp. The knocking at the door returned, faster this time. More urgent. I felt trapped, surrounded. Then my husband did something I never expected. He pulled me close, leaned into my ear and whispered, "We have to run. Now." I turned to him, my body trembling. Run where? They're everywhere. His expression darkened. There's a way out, but you won't like it. I didn't care anymore. Just tell me. He hesitated only a moment before he said the words that sent ice through my veins. We have to go underground. Descent into darkness. The wind howled like a banshee outside, rattling the windows as though something unseen was desperately trying to claw its way inside. The figures beyond the glass remained motionless, their elongated limbs and hollow faces pressed against the storm-streaked surface. My husband's grip on my wrist was firm, almost painful. His words still echoed in my ears. We have to go underground. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. What do you mean underground? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled me away from the window, away from the relentless tapping of skeletal fingers against glass. He guided me toward the hallway, his eyes darting left and right as if expecting something to lunge from the shadows. I don't have time to explain everything, he murmured. But if we stay here, they will get in. And once they do, there's no going back. I hesitated. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a frantic prisoner. You said they were watching us, that they wouldn't let me leave. Who are they? His lips pressed into a thin line. They are the ones who bound us, the ones who decided our fate before we even met. I shook my head. That doesn't make any sense. Another knock, no, a slam, shook the front door. The very walls seemed to tremble with the force of it. I let out a small yelp, stepping back instinctively. "We don't have time for this," my husband snapped, gripping my shoulders. His fingers dug into my skin, not enough to hurt, but enough to force me to focus. "You have to trust me. Come with me now, or we won't have a choice anymore." A choice? Did I even have one? I thought about the divorce papers, the ones I had signed only hours ago, believing they would be the key to my freedom. But I had never been further from freedom than I was at this moment. I exhaled shakily and gave a small nod. "Okay, let's go." Relief flickered across his face for a brief moment before he turned and led me toward the basement door. I had never been down there. It was nothing but a storage space filled with forgotten junk and dust-covered furniture. At least, that's what I had always assumed. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a key I had never seen before, and shoved it into the rusted lock. With a creak and a groan, the door swung open, revealing a darkened stairwell that seemed to descend forever. "No matter what you hear," he said, his voice low and urgent, "don't stop, don't look back, and whatever you do, don't listen to them." I shivered. Listen to who? He didn't answer. The first step felt like crossing a threshold between two worlds. The moment I placed my foot on that wooden stair, the temperature plummeted. It was no longer the warm, storm-lit home I had lived in. It was something else, something ancient, something watching. Each step creaked beneath our weight, the sound swallowed quickly by the suffocating darkness. The air smelled of damp earth, of forgotten things buried beneath layers of dust and neglect. My fingers brushed against cold stone walls as we descended further into the abyss. And then, the whispering began. It started as a murmur, just beyond the range of understanding. Soft voices slipping through the cracks in reality. They weren't speaking English. They weren't speaking anything I had ever heard before, but I understood them all the same. "You should not be here. Turn back. He is lying to you." I gasped, stopping in my tracks. The whispering stopped with me. "Don't stop," my husband hissed, grabbing my wrist and yanking me forward. "Keep going." I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but the oppressive weight of the whispers was too much. They had settled into my skin, slithering into my bones like ice-cold fingers. My feet moved against my will, stumbling blindly down the endless staircase. And then, finally, the bottom. The narrow staircase opened into a cavernous chamber lit by dozens of flickering candles. The walls were lined with symbols, etched deep into the stone like scars. The floor was covered in something dark and slick. My stomach twisted. Was that blood? At the center of the room stood an altar, and lying on the altar, no, that's impossible. I stepped forward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure on the altar was me, a perfect, lifeless replica of myself. Pale skin, motionless limbs, eyes closed as if in deep sleep. "What the hell is this?" I whispered, horror curling around my heart. My husband didn't answer. He was staring at the figure on the altar with an unreadable expression. "This is what they were keeping from you," he said finally. This is why they won't let you leave. My head spun. You're not making any sense. How is this even possible? Because, he said slowly, the night we got married, you never left this place. I staggered back. What are you talking about? I've lived in that house for years. You think you did, but they made sure you never remembered. They let you live your life above ground, thinking everything was normal. But this is where you really are. This is where you've always been. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My mind reeled against his words, against the truth I could now feel in my bones. The whispers returned, but now they were inside my head. Do not listen to him. You are not supposed to know. You must sleep again. Something moved behind me. I spun around just in time to see one of the figures from the window step out of the darkness. It was inside the chamber now. Closer. And it was reaching for me. Shadows beneath the surface. A coldness unlike anything I had ever known slithered up my spine. The thing that had been at the window, watching, was now here, in the chamber. It moved without sound, without breath, its hollow face angled toward me as if it could see, but it had no eyes, no mouth, no nose, just an empty void where a face should have been. My breath came in short, uneven gasps. My husband stood rigid beside me, his fists clenched. "Stay behind me," he whispered. "Don't let it touch you." The figure's elongated fingers twitched. Then, without warning, it lurched forward. I stumbled back, barely avoiding its grasp. My husband grabbed my arm, dragging me behind him as he fumbled with something in his pocket. The creature reached again, its bony fingers just missing my shoulder. My skin prickled where its presence lingered. Then my husband pulled out a small, rusted knife and slashed the air in front of us. The creature recoiled as if struck, letting out a soundless scream. It wasn't a noise, but rather a vibration in the air, a trembling that rattled my bones and sent icy pain through my skull. My vision blurred for a moment, then cleared. "Run!" my husband yelled, yanking me toward the far end of the chamber. "Now!" I didn't hesitate. My feet pounded against the slick stone floor as we bolted through the narrow passageway beyond the altar. The whispers in my mind surged, growing more frantic. "You must stay. You must forget. You belong here." I gritted my teeth, forcing the voices away. "Where does this lead?" I shouted, barely keeping up with my husband. "Out," he said. "But we have to be fast. They know we're leaving." Behind us, I could hear the creature regaining its composure. A sickening, slithering noise echoed through the tunnel as it followed. The passage narrowed, forcing us to duck beneath jagged rock formations. The air smelled damp, laced with something metallic. I didn't want to think about what it might be. "There's a door ahead," my husband panted. "We get through it, and we can seal them in." I pushed forward, my legs screaming in protest. Then finally, I saw it, a heavy wooden door embedded in the rock wall. My husband reached it first, yanking at the handle. It didn't budge. "Help me!" he barked. I threw my weight against it, shoving with everything I had. The whispers turned to screams. The creature was closing in. Then, the door gave way. We tumbled through, crashing onto damp earth on the other side. My husband scrambled up, grabbing the handle and slamming it shut just as the creature lunged. A heavy thud shook the door, then another. The wood groaned, but held firm. We were safe, for now. I lay on my back, chest heaving, staring at the rough ceiling above. My mind reeled. The whispers had stopped. The air felt different. "Where are we?" I gasped. My husband sat up beside me, his face pale, his eyes dark. "Somewhere they can't reach us." I swallowed hard. "But for how long?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for my hand and squeezed it tightly. "You need to remember. All of it. Before it's too late." I stared at him, dread curling in my stomach. "Remember what?" His lips parted, but before he could answer, a new sound filled the air. A different whisper. One that didn't come from the creatures. One that came from deep within me, echoes of the forgotten. I barely had time to catch my breath before the whisper grew louder. It wasn't like the voices I had heard before, the ones from the creatures, the ones clawing at my mind, urging me to stay. This one was different. It was coming from within me, from a place I didn't even know existed. My husband was still gripping my wrist, his eyes darting around the dimly lit chamber we had escaped into. His breath was ragged, his hands shaking, but my mind wasn't on him anymore. I could hear it so clearly now. A voice. My own voice. "You were never meant to remember." I gasped, stumbling backward, my pulse thundering in my ears. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. My husband didn't answer at first. Then slowly, his face hardened. "Yes," he said quietly. "I was hoping we had more time." "More time for what?" I demanded. "What the hell is happening to me?" He exhaled shakily and ran a hand through his damp hair. "It's starting." The chamber around us was nothing more than rock and shadows. Faint torchlight flickered along the uneven walls, casting eerie, elongated shapes that twisted and moved as if alive. The air was thick with dampness, the scent of earth and something else, something ancient, clinging to my skin. "You need to listen to me carefully," he said, turning to face me. "Everything you think you know about your life, about our marriage, about what's real, it's all been rewritten, altered. You were never supposed to find out the truth." My stomach twisted. "What truth?" He hesitated. "That you died." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, to say something, anything, that would make sense of the chaos unfolding around me. But he didn't. "No," I said, shaking my head. "That's impossible. I remember everything. I remember my life, our wedding, the years we spent together." "They gave you those memories," he interrupted. "They built a life for you inside something that was never real. A construct, a prison disguised as normalcy." "You're lying!" I screamed. "This is insane! I'm standing right here. I can feel—" I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. Because suddenly, I couldn't feel. Not the cold stone beneath my feet. Not the tremor in my fingers. Not the racing of my own pulse. I looked down at my hands. They were fading. My fingers flickered like a dying candle, as though I were nothing more than a reflection in rippling water. Panic surged through me. What's happening to me? My husband clenched his jaw, his face carved from stone. "They're pulling you back. They know you've seen too much." The whisper inside my head turned into a scream. "Go back, go back, go back." I fell to my knees, gripping my head as pain exploded behind my eyes. A rush of memories flooded through me, memories I didn't recognize, Places I had never been, faces that weren't mine, lifetimes collapsing into a single moment. I saw them. Tall, shadowed figures standing in a circle, their featureless faces peering down at me. A dark altar, symbols drawn in blood, a pact. And then me, lying lifeless on that very same altar, my husband kneeling beside me. The realization struck me like ice in my veins. "You knew," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You knew all along." My husband's eyes shone with something unreadable. Regret? Fear? I had no choice. A deep, shuddering breath escaped me. "What did you do?" He closed his eyes for just a moment before answering. "I brought you back." The chamber around us shuddered. The air crackled with unseen energy. The whispering voices became a deafening roar. My body was dissolving. "I won't let them take you again," he shouted, reaching for me, but I was already slipping away. The last thing I saw was the look of pure devastation on his face as darkness swallowed me whole. The final awakening. Darkness. Silence. For what felt like an eternity, I was nowhere. No sound, no touch, no time, just an endless, suffocating void, pulling me deeper into something I couldn't understand. My mind felt fragmented, torn between the life I thought I had lived and the horrifying truth my husband had revealed. Then, suddenly, a pulse, a spark of light, a voice calling my name, urgent and desperate. It was distant at first, like an echo traveling through a tunnel, but then it grew louder, closer, and I remembered I was dead. I had died a long time ago, yet somehow I had been brought back, not naturally, not through grief or longing, but through them, the watchers, the ones who had been standing at the window, the ones who whispered in the dark, the ones who had been controlling me from the very beginning, bending reality around me, keeping me trapped in a life that was never mine to live. They had given me an illusion of freedom, an illusion of choice, but I was never free. I was never meant to leave. And now, they were taking me back. I opened my eyes. I was no longer in the underground chamber. I was back in my home. The storm had stopped. The house was silent. The divorce papers lay on the table exactly as I had left them before all of this had started. It was as if none of it had ever happened. Except, I knew it had. My husband stood across from me, staring at me with the same tortured expression he had worn before I was pulled into the void. His hands trembled at his sides. "You came back," he whispered, almost in disbelief. I exhaled slowly. Was I ever really gone? He hesitated. Then, shaking his head, he muttered, "Not completely, but they were close to taking you forever." I swallowed hard. My body still felt foreign, as if I had only just returned to it, as if I were still slipping between two realities. The whispers were gone. The shadows were gone. But something about the air, about the energy around us, felt wrong. "Did we escape?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, just a fraction too long. Then, a knock at the door. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head slowly toward the front door, fear creeping up my spine. The knock was soft. Too soft. Almost polite. But I knew it was them. "Don't answer it," my husband said, his voice hoarse. "If I don't," I whispered, They'll keep coming, won't they? His jaw tightened. Yes. The air in the house shifted. The shadows in the corners lengthened. I took a slow, deep breath and stood up. My legs felt unsteady, as if I had just learned to walk. I moved toward the door, my husband's panicked whisper following me. "Don't do it. They'll pull you back." But I had to. I reached for the doorknob, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. The moment I touched it, a voice whispered inside my head, "We have always been with you." I twisted the knob. The door swung open, and there, standing just beyond the threshold, was me, a perfect reflection. I stood motionless, staring back at me with hollow eyes, with lips that parted as if to speak. But I knew what she was going to say, because I had already heard it before. "You were never meant to leave." I screamed. The world around me shattered. Time folded in on itself. The house melted away. My husband's voice was lost in the chaos, calling my name, trying to pull me back, but it was too late. They had me. Darkness swallowed everything, pulling me back into the abyss. But this time I knew there would be no coming back, no escape, no waking up, because this was never my story to begin with. This was theirs, and I had finally played my part. The end.